Hi, folks. Thanks for stopping by. We've just taken our most recent article and converted it into a podcast so that you can listen to it on the go. Yes, we used AI, but the insights we share aren't diluted in any way. Enjoy.
Welcome to the deep dive.
You know, what if I told you that trying to find your voice, like your authentic brand voice, is actually the exact reason your content sounds just like everybody else's?
Yeah, it's a pretty bold claim, right? But it's true.
It is. I mean, today we are dismantling what might be the biggest lie in content creation. This whole idea that having a strong brand voice is about, showcasing your raw personality. It's really not. It is actually an engineering problem.
Which is wild, but it completely reframes how you look at that blinking cursor on your screen.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we've all been there. You draft an email or maybe a presentation or a post for your brand, and you read it back and it just feels utterly generic.
Right, so generic.
So you try to inject more of, you into it. You try to make it punchier or maybe more casual, and somehow it still just feels flat.
Exactly. And today's deep dive is going to explain the mechanics behind why that happens, and obviously, more importantly, how you actually fix it. We are looking at this really fascinating piece by Alistair Vermaak. It's from the Systems Pack for Business.
Yeah, great publication. Yeah. And the article is titled, "What is Voice in Content? Why Most Creators Get It Wrong." Okay, let's unpack this, because the central, highly counterintuitive premise here is that if you are struggling to sound authentic, you don't actually have a voice problem. You have a thinking problem.
Which, I mean, that's a tough realization for anyone who communicates for a living, because we naturally assume our ideas are, already brilliant.
Oh, of course we do.
Right. And that our only hurdle is just finding the right stylistic flair to translate those ideas onto the page. We basically treat voice like a coat of paint.
That is the perfect analogy. It captures what I see people doing all the time. It's like the difference between painting a car and actually building a factory assembly line.
Oh, yeah.
You see creators endlessly tweaking their tone, like trying on different outfits in a dressing room. They try to sound a little more edgy today, and then maybe highly corporate tomorrow. Or they see a wildly successful creator and they just borrow their cadence.
Which never works.
Never. Because that's just slapping a fresh coat of paint on a broken car. A true voice isn't the paint. It's the assembly line. It's that underlying mechanism that takes raw materials like your daily ideas and automatically stamps them into a reliable, high-quality product every single time.
And the crazy part is, without that assembly line, you are actively damaging your business. The source actually brings in some pretty stark data to back this up. According to the Content Marketing Institute, 17% of B2B marketers admit that an inconsistent brand voice is a primary reason their entire content strategy fails.
Wow, 17%.
Yeah. I mean, they pour money, time, resources into just creating volume, but because there's no unified identity, it achieves absolutely nothing. It just becomes noise.
But wait, I have to stop you there and push back on this a little bit, because this idea of an assembly line, the ultimate advice you hear from literally every marketing guru on the internet is, just be yourself.
That's the classic advice.
Because audiences crave authenticity. Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm structuring all my thoughts through this rigid factory framework, am I not losing my humanity? Like, if I'm sad or frustrated one day, shouldn't my audience feel that raw emotion? Doesn't just being yourself work better than being this engineered machine?
Well, so that is the exact friction Vermaak addresses in the piece, and he completely dismantles the just be yourself myth, because think about what yourself actually is on a daily basis.
It's a mess.
Exactly. It fluctuates constantly. You are tired in the morning, you're annoyed by lunch, and then maybe you're inspired by dinner. If you just dump those raw, unstructured emotional states onto a page, you aren't being authentic in a way that actually serves the reader. You're just being chaotic.
Oh, so you can be completely honest, but still just sound like a mess.
Precisely. Raw emotion is not a voice. True voice, as defined in the text, is a repeatable pattern of thinking. It's the consistent way you naturally diagnose problems, the way you challenge assumptions, and how you explain solutions. It's the cognitive pattern behind the words, not the emotional state of the writer.
Hold on, though. If I use the exact same diagnostic pattern every single time I write a post, won't my audience get, incredibly sick of me? Doesn't a pattern just equal predictable and therefore boring?
That's a really great question. But you have to separate a predictable format from a predictable insight. The structure is what allows the insight to actually shine.
Okay, make that make sense for me.
So when your audience knows exactly how you approach a problem, they don't get bored. They build trust. They start to rely on your specific lens to make sense of the world for them. And again, the data prove this mechanism works. The piece cites funnel.io, noting that brands with high consistency are 3.5 times more likely to achieve strong brand recall.
3.5 times. That is a massive advantage just for applying, a structural lens to your thoughts.
It is, because consistency of thought breeds familiarity, and familiarity is the bedrock of trust.
Okay, so if I buy into this, if I accept that I need an assembly line instead of just throwing my quirky personality at a page, how do I actually build it? Like, what is this cognitive pattern actually supposed to do?
So the article breaks this down into 3 crucial mechanical jobs of a strong content voice. Job number 1 is to spot the real problem. And by that, Vermock means naming the root cause, not just describing the symptoms that everyone else is already complaining about.
Right, let's ground this. The article uses a brilliant, really relatable example about the concept of consistency. Let's say you're writing a piece on how hard it is to stay consistent with your goals.
A very common topic.
Very common. So a generic post, the kind that relies on paint instead of an assembly line, will say something like, show up every day, stay disciplined, push through the pain.
Which is entirely symptom-focused. It's essentially looking at the audience and saying, hey, you're failing because you lack motivation. It's not helpful. It's just an observation wrapped in a command.
Right. But a structured post, a piece of content with a real engineered voice, takes that exact same topic and processes it through a diagnostic lens. It says, consistency is a system issue, not a motivation issue. If your output depends on your feelings, your process is fundamentally unstable.
Look at the mechanical difference there. The second post diagnosed a root cause, a lack of systems. And that naturally forces the second job of a voice, which is the reframe.
Wait, so if I diagnose the system as broken, like telling my audience they lack a system instead of motivation, aren't I just being negative? How does a reframe turn a critique into something actually helpful?
By giving the audience an aha moment, the reframe is the mechanism where you tell the audience you think your problem is X, but it's actually Y.
Ah, I see.
You thought your problem was motivation, but it's actually your system. When you execute a reframe like that, it makes people stop scrolling because you've mirrored their internal struggle, but you're offering them a completely new perspective on why they're stuck.
That makes so much sense. And that leads right into the third job, which is providing a clear path forward. Because if you only diagnose the problem and offer a clever reframe, you're just a critic.
Exactly. You're just complaining with them.
Yeah. A true voice has to offer actionable advice anchored in that new structure. You have to show them how to build the system.
That's it. Structure is what makes your voice recognizable. If you just have strong opinions without a structured path forward, your content will not stick.
Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. Because the source uses a case study that I found really illuminating. Let's talk about Illuminate Labs. They operate in the dietary supplement space. And I mean, let's be honest, that is an industry notorious for a complete lack of consumer trust.
Oh, absolutely.
It is full of snake oil, hidden proprietary blends, exaggerated claims.
It's an incredibly low trust environment. And if we look at how most companies in that space try to solve the trust issue, they do it stylistically.
Right.
They try to simply sound trustworthy. They adopt this calm, clinical tone. They use words like pure or natural. They put pictures of people in lab coats on their homepage.
They are painting the car.
They are painting the car. But Illuminate Labs didn't just try to sound reliable. They built their entire voice around one core diagnostic lens, which was the supplement industry lacks transparency. That was their root cause.
So instead of pumping out generic wellness tips about, drinking more water or adopting a fake clinical tone, they engineered their content around that one specific problem. They repeatedly published third-party testing data. They broke down ingredient quality. Every single piece of content they put out passed through that same trust-first, transparency-driven diagnostic assembly line.
And the result was genuine trust in a really crowded market. They identified the rot in the industry. They reframed how consumers should evaluate what they put in their bodies. And they provided the path forward through radical transparency. They chose a persona, the uncompromising truth teller in a shady industry, and they committed to it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That commitment piece is so critical. The article suggests that building a voice is essentially like choosing a character on a stage. You can be the humorous provocateur, you can be the highly analytical deep diver, but the rule is once you step onto that stage, you have to stay in character.
Yes.
You cannot be the chaotic comedian on Monday and then the austere academic on Tuesday.
Because that breaks the pattern. And human brains are essentially highly evolved pattern recognition machines. When the pattern breaks, we experience cognitive dissonance. Basically, our brain's internal alarm bells ring because reality isn't matching our expectations. We feel friction, and when an audience feels friction, they tune out.
This explains why copying other creators fails so spectacularly. If you borrow the cadence of a creator who naturally thinks in highly analytical, data-driven frameworks, but your natural assembly line is built for, say, emotional storytelling, the friction is going to be obvious.
Definitely.
The audience might not be able to articulate exactly what is wrong, but they will absolutely feel that cognitive dissonance. They will know it's a costume.
That is the danger of mimicry without understanding the underlying mechanics.
So we've seen how this mechanism works for a specific niche brand like Illuminate Labs trying to build trust. But I want to push this further. What happens when you scale this systemic thinking up? Does this framework hold up when you are dealing with a massive corporate empire with hundreds of employees creating content?
It does, and the source material provides what is essentially a masterclass in scaling this exact concept, and that's HubSpot. HubSpot is a giant in the marketing software world, and they didn't just stumble into their voice through trial and error or by hiring clever copywriters. They explicitly engineered their entire corporate voice around a single diagnostic.
I love looking at how the big players do this. So what was their assembly line? How did they diagnose the problem?
They started with the root cause. Traditional marketing is broken because it relies on interruption, cold calls, pop-up ads, unskippable commercials. People hate being interrupted.
It's the worst. It's totally an antagonistic relationship with the customer.
Right. So they diagnosed the problem and then they executed the reframe. Marketing shouldn't interrupt. It should attract. You create undeniable value and people come to you willingly. They actually coined this inbound marketing. And then comes the third job, the path forward. They built their entire software platform and their entire content ecosystem to facilitate this inbound approach.
But think about the friction of actually executing that across a massive company.
Yeah.
You have sales teams who want to blast out feature lists. You have executives who want to talk about, corporate milestones. But if HubSpot's voice is strictly inbound marketing, that means every single blog post, every downloadable template, every podcast, and every certification course has to pass through that exact same logical filter.
Yeah, everything.
Outbound is broken. Inbound works. Here is the path forward.
It requires an incredible amount of discipline to maintain that structure. But look at the compounding result. They didn't just get a few viral posts. They built an absolute fortress of industry authority, generating millions of monthly organic visitors. When you start from scratch every day with a new stylistic voice or chase the latest trend, your efforts don't stack. But HubSpot's content library compounds because every piece reinforces the exact same cognitive pattern.
It's a relentless consistency, and it brings up a brilliant quote from the text by Arjun Basu. He says, "Without strategy, content is just stuff, and the world has enough stuff."
The world has enough stuff. That is the defining challenge of the modern internet.
Which brings me to the absolute elephant in the room. If we are talking about the sheer volume of stuff being created, we have to talk about AI. If voice is just a thinking system, how does this framework apply when literally anyone can ask ChatGPT to write a blog post in 3 seconds? Is AI going to destroy the concept of a unique voice?
Actually, the exact opposite is true.
Wait, really?
Yeah. AI is the ultimate litmus test for whether you truly have a thinking system. To understand why, you have to look at how large language models actually work. They are essentially highly advanced autocomplete engines built on token prediction. They scrape vast amounts of human data and predict the most mathematically likely next word. They scrape the average.
If you give it a generic prompt, you are mathematically guaranteeing an average generic output.
Exactly. If you type write a LinkedIn post about leadership, the AI looks at the entire history of mediocre leadership posts on the internet and spits out the most middle-of-the-road bland text possible. It sounds like everyone, which means it has no voice.
Because you didn't give it the assembly line. You asked it to paint a car that doesn't exist.
You didn't provide the cognitive pattern. But if you understand that voice is an engineering problem, AI becomes a massive amplifier. Instead of a generic prompt, you feed the AI your framework. You prompt it by saying, diagnose the problem of poor leadership as a failure of communication systems, not a failure of empathy. Reframe the solution around establishing clear mathematical feedback loops. Provide 3 actionable steps based on this.
Oh, wow. That completely changes the output. By explicitly giving the AI the root cause, the reframe, and the path forward, the AI is no longer scraping the average. It is executing your specific cognitive pattern.
Yep.
The AI isn't stealing your voice, it's waiting for you to provide the blueprint.
Precisely. If you have the structural blueprint, AI allows you to scale your voice infinitely. If you don't, it just builds generic boxes faster. And this move towards structure isn't just theory. We are seeing it play out in macro industry trends right now.
Yes, the source mentioned some fascinating clippings from the business world that prove pure stylistic stunts are losing their effectiveness. Let's talk about Duolingo. For a while, they were the absolute kings of TikTok with their unhinged marketing. They had this giant green owl mascot causing absolute chaos, threatening people to take their Spanish lessons.
It was incredibly viral. It was the definition of prioritizing a wild, stylistic personality over a structured system.
But the article notes that even brands famous for that kind of chaotic virality are actively dialing it back. Why? If it works so well, why are they pivoting toward a more structured strategy?
Because chaos does not compound. Even the most entertaining viral stunts have a shelf life. An audience will eventually experience fatigue if there is no underlying value or structural insight being delivered. If you want to build a sustainable business engine that drives reliable growth, you inevitably have to transition from being a stylistic entertainer to being a reliable system. You can't run a Fortune 500 company purely on shock value.
It's the same reason we are seeing the massive rise in the whole clipping trend. Creators aren't just turning on a camera and ranting anymore. They are taking highly structured, systematized, long-form content, like a deeply researched hour-long interview, and chopping it up into dozens of highly focused shorts and reels.
Which is, again, prioritizing an engineered system over isolated bursts of creativity. The creators winning right now are the ones treating their ideas like an assembly line.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground here. We started by dismantling the illusion that a brand voice is just your raw personality, and we looked at the friction of relying on just being yourself. We explored the 3 mechanical jobs of a true voice: diagnosing the root cause, executing the reframe, and providing a clear path forward. We saw how Illuminate Labs used that to build trust in a shady market, how HubSpot scaled it into an empire, and how understanding large language models makes AI your ultimate amplifier rather than your replacement.
It really requires a completely different approach to communication.
It does. And so, what does this all mean for you, listening right now? The text makes it incredibly clear. The fastest way to elevate your communication is to change the internal question you ask yourself before you type a single word. You have to stop asking, "What should I post today?" Or, "How can I make this email sound more like me?"
Instead, you need to ask, how do I consistently break down this problem?
How do I consistently break down this problem? When you make that shift, communication stops being a creative guessing game and turns into a predictable, reliable machine. There's a brilliant quote from Anne Handley in the source material that perfectly defines the target you should be aiming for. She says, "Be specific enough to be believable and universal enough to be relevant."
And achieving that balance is impossible without a structural framework. If you are just guessing at your tone every day, your specific details will seem random, and your universal truths will sound like cliches. Structure is the only thing that binds believability and relevance together.
I want to circle back to where we started. We talked about that universal feeling of staring at the blinking cursor, rewriting a sentence 5 times because it didn't feel authentic. We talked about trying on different stylistic outfits, hoping one magically becomes our identity. But after unpacking the mechanics of how this actually works, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If your true voice is not your raw personality, but rather a crystallized, rigorously engineered system of how you solve problems, could adopting a strict content voice actually change the way you run your business or even your life? Think about the mechanics of that. If you force yourself day after day to communicate using a unified, strict system of diagnosing root causes and reframing problems, does your company's actual DNA eventually rewrite itself to match that structure? Does faking a brilliant, highly structured system eventually turn you into a brilliant, highly structured thinker?
Wow. That is an incredibly profound concept. It suggests that voice isn't just a reflection of who you are right now. It's actually a blueprint for who you are forcing yourself to become.
Exactly. The assembly line builds the product, but eventually it builds the company. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. We create new episodes every week and post on Thursdays. Consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell so that you're alerted when the next podcast goes live. See you next week.